Now, the thing that you have to understand is what the definition of Theravada monk is. A Theravada monk is someone who takes some of the commentaries as the teaching of the Buddha. The Visuddhi Magga is definitely a commentary. What is a commentary? A commentary is something that is an opinion about what the Buddha was talking about. When I give a discourse, I am giving you some opinion, but the opinions I'm giving you match up with what it says in the suttas. The commentary of Dhammapala, he started up the university that Buddhaghosa went to. He was about the 2nd century AD. Buddhaghosa was about the late 4th and 5th century AD. And Venerable Buddhadasa, now this is not the Thai Buddhadasa, this is another monk that was about the same time as Buddhaghosa. It had become fairly knowledgeable that the Sri Lankans, they had a lot of commentary, but they were all in Sinhala. And supposedly Arahats were writing these commentaries, but I'm sure it wasn't only Arahats, because there's some mistakes in things. So, Buddhadasa,
where was the university?
in mid-India. It started moving south. And the Nalanda and all of that became a Mahayana place. Anyway, his university, he had a few thousand monks there that was being taught. It was a thriving place. But what Buddhadasa did was he went to Sri Lanka to translate all of the commentaries back into Pali, but he used a very high, hard-to-understand Pali. And when he wrote everything, he had no breaks. He might do 15 or 20 pages without one paragraph. And they didn't have any periods or anything, so it was just very hard to read the way he did it. Anyway, it was about the time that Buddhaghosa had pretty much mastered the Pali language, and he started to get some pride. And he started thinking that he knew Pali better than his teacher. And his teacher read his mind and said, now you have to pay your penance. And what you have to do is you have to go to Sri Lanka and change the commentaries back into Pali and do it in a good readable way. And as he was going on a boat to Sri Lanka, Buddhadasa was coming back to India on a boat, and they met in the middle of the ocean and discussed what had been done, and then they went on their merry way. The first thing that was the Visuddhi Magga when he got to Sri Lanka. And a lot of the scholars, that was kind of his test to see whether he was actually capable of doing the work that needed to be done. They wouldn't just let him come in and say, I'm the hotshot Pali scholar, I'm going to do this. They had to find out what he knew. The Venerable Buddhaghosa, he was very confused about meditation. He was a Veda scholar, and he had memorized all of the Vedas before he became a Buddhist monk. In the Vedas, they describe meditation in a lot of different ways, but almost all of them that I've run across, all of them, are the practice of one-pointed concentration, absorption concentration. You have to have a nimitta arise in your mind, and there's a great big deal about nimittas. A nimitta is just like a circle that you start visualizing, and you take that as your object of meditation instead of staying with the breath when you're doing anapanasati. And he wrote the Visuddhi Magga in such a way that everybody got excited by it. Now, at the time in Sri Lanka, the scholarship had gone down. The practice of meditation had nearly disappeared. So here he comes with, quote, the Encyclopedia of Meditation, and this very scholarly work, and the monks picked it up and they went, yep, that's right. And then they started practicing and they got real excited. So what he did was he gave a shot in the arm to the Sangha in Sri Lanka, and that was a good thing. But after 10 or 15 years, they started expanding their scholarship, going back to the suttas and going, wait a minute, this is wrong what he put down here. This isn't what the Buddha said. And that became kind of it was almost a schism, because the ones that they really grabbed onto the Visuddhi Magga and held on to it, this is right, this is a good book, this is really correct. And then the other monks started going, well, actually it's not as good as it could be, and we need to not use that as our main book. But that book, he wrote it in such a way that it was scholarly and easy to understand, and the monks that figured out that it wasn't right couldn't stop the growth of it. And about that time, there was some doubt about the purity of the Sangha in Burma. So they sent 2 boatloads of monks from Burma to Sri Lanka. And they disrobed and then they reordained, so the purity could be upheld. And while they were there, they saw the Visuddhi Magga and they made a few copies of it and they took it back to Burma with them. As it turns out, one of the boats sunk, and it killed a couple hundred monks, but the other boat made it back. And they have spent over 1,000 years trying to justify the Visuddhi Magga with the suttas, and they're pretty convincing in a lot of ways. But their scholarship at the time was not great. Their practices were almost non-existent. So this is a time when Buddhism had taken the wave down, and because of that book, it started to get people into their scholarship again and studies and that sort of thing. But they've really held on tight to the Visuddhi Magga. It's a real interesting phenomena. Buddhaghosa did a lot of translation from Sri Lankan language back into Pali. And he did this with the commentaries that the monks had written down. He was not very well versed in anything of the Buddha's teaching except Pali itself. He has made a lot of marginal guesses as to what the Buddha was talking about. But monks of later times have written what we call sub-commentaries, and it's a comment on what the commentary says. And there's a lot of correction in the commentaries over what Buddhaghosa was writing. Unfortunately, we don't have many of those in English. They're in Pali, and a lot of them are in the Burmese script. And if you know the Burmese script, it's not easy to read.
And you say that you went to Sri Lanka to look at some of the historical places where these
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I went to the cave where they originally started writing out the suttas. And they did it from their own memory. But then they would write it out, and then they would recite it in front of other people to see whether it had any mistakes in it or not. But when you start writing down things instead of committing things to memory, you have a tendency to change things a little bit. So when they started writing down the suttas, there were some belief systems that some monks had that they were more Brahmin than they were Buddhist. And they put some of that understanding in it. So we don't have 100% pristine Buddha's teaching these days. But it is in reasonably good shape, and when you practice on your own and see what the Buddha is talking about, you can decide for yourself whether the sutta is correct or not, or that sutta. The interesting thing about the Visuddhi Magga is that it doesn't really match up very well with what it says in the suttas about the practice of meditation. And there is a way that the Buddha gave us to be able to recognize whether it's coming from the teaching of the Buddha or it's from a commentary. Now, the instructions that the Buddha gave us for finding out whether this is really what the Buddha was talking about or it is a commentary that somebody else made up comes from the Digha Nikaya. It's the Parinibbana Sutta. This is the longest sutta in all of the discourses that the Buddha gave. When you read it, it's about 100 pages. There's a whole bunch of information in it. But on section 4, number 8, it says, suppose a monk were to say, friends, I heard and received this from the Lord's own lips. This is the Dhamma, this is the discipline, this is the Master's teaching. Then, monks, you should neither approve nor disapprove his words. Then, without approving or disapproving his words and expressions, you should carefully noted, compared with the suttas, and reviewed in the light of the discipline. If they, on such comparisons and review, are found not to conform with the suttas and the discipline, the conclusion must be assuredly, this is not the word of the Buddha. It has been wrongly understood by this monk, and the matter is to be rejected. But if here on such comparison and review they are found to conform to the suttas and the discipline, the conclusion must be assuredly, this is the word of the Buddha. It has been rightly understood by this monk. This is the first criterion. So you can see that the suttas are very important to pay attention to, because they are closer to the words of the Buddha than commentaries can be. Now, when an awful lot of people are practicing and they're talking about the importance of a nimitta, it means sign in Pali, it is found very, very seldom in the suttas. So when you start thinking about the actual instructions of the Buddha that are given in the suttas, and compare that with the suttas with what your teacher is showing you, if it agrees with the discipline and the suttas, you can be pretty confident that this is the teaching of the Buddha. This is a book I use most of all. This is the middle length sayings. I use the middle length sayings because the discourses aren't too long and they're not too short. And generally I can go through one sutta in the evening. When you're talking about the suttas, and you notice that I read the suttas, so you know it's not my words that I'm using. And then I will give you some kind of explanation of how it goes.